Welcome to the Criminologist Podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 64 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. As we come out of the pandemic, we are likely all realizing that some things in our lives will never go back to our pre-COVID experiences, whether that is working from home or growing accustomed to Zoom meetings or even watching the latest Marvel Comics movie released straight to our favorite streaming service. I feel many of us are also undergoing an accounting of all of the lingering facets of COVID-19 and, in particular, all the lockdown measures. If you are a regular listener to this show, you have heard us speak of how trauma factors into the lives of those we serve, or conversely, how trauma touches the practitioners. And I think this issue became even more relevant during the pandemic, which is why I am so excited to be sharing my recent interview with Dr. Jerrod Brown with you all today. Dr. Brown is an old friend and, dare I say, mentor. Jerrod Brown, PhD, is a professor, trainer, researcher, and consultant with multiple years of experience teaching collegiate courses. Jerrod is currently an assistant professor, program director, and lead developer for the Master of Arts degree in Human Services with an emphasis in forensic behavioral health and a second emphasis area in trauma, resilience, and self-care strategies for Concordia University, right here in St. Paul, Minnesota. In addition to the experience mentioned above, Jerrod has provided consultation services to a number of caregivers, professionals, and organizations pertaining to topics related to autism spectrum disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, confabulation, suggestibility, trauma and other life adversities, traumatic brain injury, and youth fire setting. Jerrod has also conducted numerous trainings for professional and student audiences. Dr. Brown is also the founder and CEO of the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies and the editor-in-chief of Forensic Scholars Today. Jerrod has completed 4 separate master's degree programs and holds graduate certificates in autism spectrum disorder, other health disabilities, and traumatic brain injuries. Jerrod has published several articles and book chapters. There are so many fascinating things I can talk to Jerrod about and hope to in future podcast episodes, but today we're really going to focus on his work around trauma, resiliency, and self-care strategies. So, without any further ado, I present to you my recent conversation with Dr. Jerrod Brown, and I will see you all on the other side. Welcome to the show, Dr. Brown. Why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself and, generally speaking, a little bit about your background, both educationally and vocationally.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on today and looking forward to chatting with you. I work at Concordia University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a professor there, and I'm the program director for the Master of Arts in Human Services degree with an emphasis in forensic behavioral health. And this fall, we'll be launching a second emphasis area in trauma, resilience, and self-care strategies. I've done a lot of research and publishing and consulting in the areas that look at topics that intersect with the criminal justice and forensic mental health arena. In particular, I do a lot of work in the area of autism, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, traumatic brain injuries, done quite a bit of work with cases involving youth fire setting, and I dabble with topics related to confabulation, suggestibility, theory of mind, and we can dig into all those topics today if you'd like. But yeah, really interested in research, training, consulting, teaching, and definitely, again, thanks for the opportunity to be able to share some of these things with your viewers.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I've read some of your work. We've done a little bit of work together. And as you said, we could go down several rabbit holes. Let's stick with the topic of trauma and resiliency today. So what are the causes and consequences associated with trauma in the era of COVID-19 and beyond?
Yeah, I've done quite a few trainings recently for various organizations, and the research coming out is absolutely clear that during the era of COVID-19, we've seen increases in traumatic stress responses and exposure. Domestic violence appears to be on the rise, substance misuse, child abuse. So all of these things appear to be on the rise. And when COVID is finally over, I suspect, too, we're going to see a lot of these after effects go on for a long period of time. What are some of the causes? I think uncertainty comes to mind. Let's say you are someone that just lost their job. You're on the verge of homelessness, poverty. You don't know where your next check is going to come from. You're worried about paying your water bill, your light bill. There's a lot of stress in the household. Trying to juggle your work life with helping your kids do school. All of these things can amplify stress. People aren't sleeping well. There's so much research coming out about increased sleep problems, anxiety, and depression. All of these factors, it's not just one factor, it's many factors that are increasing the stress in people. And in some cases, it can carry over into, in some cases, unfortunately, child abuse, domestic violence. So self-care is so important. Just having a good balance. Being okay to say, I'm not feeling okay. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Vulnerability is actually a pretty good thing, I think. Lots of things we can do to help the clients we work with, but also as professionals, we need to be aware of these situations and exposures to the clients we're working with. There's something called vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. We need to be aware of the topics of burnout. If you're working in a helping profession, criminal justice, mental health, human service, you're probably coming into contact with clients and you hear these stories over and over and over again. That can lead to a lot of stress in the professionals. So those are some things I think we need to be aware of during this era of COVID-19 and beyond.
Yeah, and that leads to my follow-up question. Why is it important in this era of COVID and beyond to become trauma-informed?
Well, when we think of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed approaches, it's really a framework. If you're working in the criminal justice arena, if you're working in the mental health arena, if you're just working with people in general, I think it's absolutely imperative to kind of have a trauma-informed mindset. Everybody, almost every human is susceptible to trauma exposure. Most people have experienced trauma at some point in their life. Trauma can be a one-time situation. It could be a cumulative type of situation where that could be complex trauma. And complex trauma happens over typically a longer period of time. It can be uncontrollable. It can be absolutely devastating to child brain development. The list goes on. But if you're working in any of these arenas, you're working with at-risk kids, you're working in a domestic abuse shelter, homeless outreach setting, if you're a law enforcement officer, you're probably coming into contact with clients that have trauma histories on a regular basis. So if we have a trauma-informed mindset, professionals will be in a much better position to understand how trauma impacts the people you work with, because trauma can rob people of their joy. It can impact their energy. It can impact their mental health, their physical health. If you are doing an interview with a client, it can really impact the way in which that client communicates with you. So we want to really have a trauma-informed mindset, and we'll approach it in a much more humble manner. I think we'll be much more curious. I think trauma-informed care is really a mindset, an approach, a framework that is a systems approach. And it's all the way up to the top of the president or the CEO of a company, all the way down to everyone in between, the person answering the phone, the day-to-day staff. It's how we approach clients. Are we coming off as kind and respectful? Or are we coming off as edgy and irritated? Instilling safety in the clients, instilling hope, promoting health and wellness are all trauma-informed principles.
You mentioned some of the professionals earlier when you touched on criminal justice practitioners, mental health practitioners, those dealing with clients struggling with substance misuse. What are some of the solutions those professionals could use when working with persons impacted by trauma?
Again, I think seeking out education on these topics, learning as much as you can, because these are pretty big topics, are complex. There's a lot of moving parts. So seeking out training, staying current on the research literature, just finding out what's coming out in the research world, consulting with other professionals who have an expertise in this area. Other things, promoting positive sleep practices is a core foundational thing to health. Teaching clients how to have boundaries, self-care, creating a consistent schedule. Something as simple as maybe, to us it's very simple, maybe to a client, there's so many barriers and challenges for them to get a good night's sleep. Lots of things we could talk about with sleep. Sleep and trauma don't go good together. Most people with trauma exposure experience some sleep problems. When sleep problems go on for a long period of time, that can increase depression, anxiety, that can impact our decision making. If you're working with a client who's chronically sleep deprived, there might be a higher likelihood that he or she has some memory problems. Maybe you're a probation officer, and for probation, they require, in some cases, a client to be able to hold a job or hold housing. The simple thing of sleep is a barrier for some to be able to hold a job, to fill out an application. What happens if the client was in a domestic violence situation and there's an untreated traumatic brain injury? What happens if there's substance misuse going on? So there's a lot of moving parts. So what do we do about it? Learn as much as possible, not do it in isolation. We usually have to approach these topics and problems from a multidisciplinary lens. So a good example would be maybe you have a client and you're a probation officer. The client may also need medical health care. They may need a case manager. They may need a mental health specialist. It's important we work together as a team. And if we can have that team approach and really come around that client, I think it can lead to much better positive outcomes.
Yeah, I've always been a huge advocate as that multidisciplinary approach, as you put it, or that holistic approach. I think that is so crucial. You may have touched on some of this in your previous reply just now, Jerrod, but what are some techniques and strategies professionals should consider when promoting their own self-care?
Yeah, I'll put sleep at the top of the list again. I am guilty as charged, but disconnecting from the computer or the screen at night, very important. If we're looking at that screen 24/7, or that can impact sleep, that can impact energy. I do a lot of work in the area. I do a lot of trainings in this area with screen time misuse. It's a big issue for a lot of people. So having balance around that, maybe it's taking a day off from the screen, going outside and getting up the same time every day, getting some fresh air, going for a walk, going to bed the same time at night, eating healthy. Very important to eat healthy. Not to skip meals. I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of that. If we skip a meal, that can throw off our blood sugar level. That can make blood sugar go down. That can impact our mood. If people are binge eating and eating really unhealthy things, even particularly right before bedtime, that can spike our blood sugar levels, and that can impact a lot of things. Maybe it's listening to soft music before bedtime. Maybe some people like stretching or yoga or deep breathing. Connecting with positive people too. Social isolation is a real big issue in this era of COVID, and another driving factor why we're seeing an increase in some of these things I spoke about before. Going outside, there's something called therapeutic gardening. Just getting outside and gardening, being in nature. Self-care strategies, maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's an adult coloring book. I know people that like coloring. It's a good distraction. Knitting. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do. But I think the things we really want to avoid, being on the screen too much, eating too many things right before bedtime, having a very just mindset of I need sugar all the time. I think sugar is a big thing for a lot of people, cutting down on sugar. A couple people I know really have sleep problems, and we dug deeper into it, figured out it was a simple solution. They were drinking a lot of water right before bedtime, so they would wake up many times a night having to go to the bathroom. Getting your technology out of the bedroom, I think, is important, because I know some people like to sleep with their gadgets in their bedroom, so that's beeping half the night and they're not getting any sleep. Knowing it's okay to say no sometimes, taking a step back, pausing, reflecting, and just slowing down a little bit too, and not burning yourself out by working 24/7 are a few tips I would recommend.
Yeah, and I'm guilty as charged with a few of those, up to and including the screen time. I'm looking at 4 screens right now as we speak. So maybe I should take your course, which you're here to promote and talk about. Tell us why Concordia University in St. Paul developed a master's degree in human services with an emphasis in trauma, resilience, and self-care strategies program.
Many of the things I spoke about before are some of the things we're going to tackle in this program. And Concordia recognizes that these issues were here before COVID, but they're only amplified now and most likely beyond for a period of time. We know that there are a number of helping professions that would benefit from this kind of education. And again, if you're working in any of the human service, social service, or any helping professions, and that's a pretty big, broad word. Helping professions could be someone working in a group home. It could be a probation officer. It could be a child welfare worker. If you're working with people, you would benefit from learning about trauma. And we're going to equip people with the knowledge, the resources, and the competencies to feel more empowered to be able to understand these complex types of topics and issues. Some of the things that we will dig into if a student enters this program through that trauma certificate, they're going to walk away knowing about the various types of trauma. And trauma is a big topic again. You have post-traumatic stress disorder. People will learn about complex and developmental trauma. That is a type of trauma that happens during like critical periods of development and early on in life typically, where that can damage that child's brain and lead to a host of issues. And these issues usually carry on through the lifespan without proper supports and services. People are going to be introduced to the adverse childhood experiences research literature. If you just go online and type in the adverse childhood experiences literature, you're going to find just countless resources. That is a foundational topic we're going to talk about. People are also going to learn about the importance of attachment and attachment theory. So those are some of the big topics. Some of the other subtopics that people are going to learn about is how does trauma impact special needs populations? People with autism, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, individuals with a serious and persistent mental health issue. We're going to talk about the impact that trauma has on the entire family system as well. So it's important not just to understand the impact it has on the individual client, but how does it impact their family, their spouse, their children. So we'll talk about high conflict divorce, child abuse, parentification, parental alienation. These are some topics we'll cover. We'll also get into a course that's specific to the helping professional, where we're going to talk about, okay, what does the helping professional need to know about self-care strategies? And a lot of the things we're going to talk about in there is going to be resilience and self-care, secondary trauma, because we want to equip workers with the knowledge that they can go and hopefully take care of themselves as well, because the healthier they are, the more equipped they're going to be able to work and serve the clients that they meet with. I want to mention too that this is a non-licensure program. So people that go through this are not going to become licensed, but they are going to get a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge, a lot of tools that's going to help them in a variety of settings. If you're a licensed professional already in the field, this program would benefit you as well, especially the certificate track, because even if you're a licensed professional, it could be a licensed psychologist, a social worker, a marriage and family therapist, or even a drug and alcohol counselor. You're coming into contact most likely with people with trauma histories on a regular basis. So the more you can learn about trauma and its impact on the clients, you'll be in a better position, hopefully, to develop interventions and goal plans and strategies that can just help equip clients to live a more healthy and successful life.
Well, so for those listeners who are interested in learning more about either the full master's program, Jerrod, or the certificate program, what can they do to learn more?
I would say if you Google Concordia University St. Paul and you type in trauma, resilience, and self-care, it'll bring you right to the homepage. Great homepage, tells you a lot about the program, the courses, a description of each. If you have specific questions I can answer for you, I'm always more than happy to have a discussion with people individually. My email address is the letter J and then Brown, BROWN, 3 at csp.edu. And Joe, I don't know if you can share a link to the website and my contact information, and then we can direct people to admissions if they do want to sign up for this. A lot of great folks at admissions that will dig into kind of the application process as well. But if you have specific questions about the content being covered in the program, more than happy to have a discussion with you.
And yes, to your question, I will leave both the Concordia link as well as your email information within the show notes of this episode. So folks can just look at this episode description and find that information there. And then finally, I need to ask, because I know through my analytics, I've got listeners not just outside of Minnesota, outside the United States. Are these courses and certificate program offered face-to-face or also virtual online?
Great question. 100% online. So if you have access to a computer and internet, if you met qualifications, the requirements to sign up, you could access this. These are courses that can be accessed online. We're looking at starting our first cohort this fall, and it's a cohort model. So in theory, when you sign up, you would be with that same group of students throughout the course of your studies. So you'll get to know other students. And that's another great way to learn, because there's so many students that come from just a wealth of experience and backgrounds and knowledge. So learning from students as well as the instructor. And a unique feature of this program too is that a very high percentage of the courses are co-instructed. So it's not just one instructor teaching. You'll have two instructors throughout the course of many of these classes.
Dr. Jerrod Brown from Concordia University, I'm going to have you back to talk about so many other projects, but I really wanted to talk about this topic around trauma because, like you said, COVID and beyond, this is going to really touch on all of the helping professions. And I know this is a great program. I've got experience, obviously, working at Concordia myself as an adjunct, and I know they produce quality programming, and I know I can say the same for you, sir. So thanks for being on the show, and we'll have to have you back sometime to talk more future projects.
A quick break from the show to give a shout out to our friends at APHIS, the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies. APHIS is a professional organization dedicated to uniting the forensic communities of criminal justice, education, law, medicine, and psychology. APHIS is a leader in building relationships within the forensic community, locally and nationally. The mission of the American Institute for the Advancement of Forensic Studies is to provide quality education, training, consultation, and research in the forensic studies to professionals and students. APHIS is a leader in connecting members with one another to help facilitate professional growth, increase competency, and awareness in forensic mental health studies. For details as to upcoming training events, webinars, or publications, please visit them at www.aiafs.com. And now, back to the show.
As promised, the link we referenced for Concordia University St. Paul can be found in the show notes of this episode. You can also reach out to Dr. Brown directly at jbrown3, jbrown, and the number 3, at csp.edu. That stands for Concordia St. Paul. jbrown3 at csp.edu. Again, I'll leave that email address in the show notes as well. I have been an adjunct at Concordia University in St. Paul for over 20 years and can attest to the quality of their programs. And as noted, both of the programs that Dr. Brown was discussing, the full master's degree program as well as the graduate certificate program, are offered online virtually. So if you have internet access, you are able to partake in these excellent programs, which I presume may be in high demand right now. So please check them out if interested in augmenting some of your own human capital. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices or implementation, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. We're also on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow on Twitter. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is now available. If you're interested, simply reach out to the show. And if you believe in what we're doing here, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the show, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Your story is not yet finished. It's still to be continued. It's unfolding, and a story only you can tell.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.